All right, our main keynote speaker for today, we've been working with Google now for many years as an agency, but we always try and get Google. So I'd like to welcome on stage Liz Freeman, who's the Industry Manager, Travel for Google, who's going to present the keynote of Maximum Occupancy 2024, Connecting with the Considered Traveller. Please, big round of applause, Liz Freeman from Google. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you've been enjoying the conference so far. As Adrian said, my name is Liz Freeman. I am an industry manager at Google in Australia across travel. So I work with some of our largest travel brands on their marketing strategy. So think Google Ads, think YouTube, think search. That is sort of what I am doing on a day-to-day basis. A really big part of what I'm lucky enough to do as well is be really focused on the consumer. At Google, we have a lot of data, which is really an exciting insight into the consumer. So I am keen to take you through some of that today. Before we get into that specifically, I did want to share a little bit about me as a traveler. This might overwhelm some of you. But does anyone else know the next 534 destinations that they want to go to? Any hands? Anyone have me beat? No? As you can see, I am a passionate traveler. Anytime I see a friend has gone somewhere or I see a new video on YouTube or something on Instagram, I mark it on Google Maps so that if I'm ever going on a road trip or nearby, I can really make sure to maximize my time. Interestingly, I'm pretty sure before I moved to Australia, the very first pin that I marked in Australia was Lake Hillier on Middle Island off of Esperance, so super inconvenient and have not managed to check that off my list yet, but I'm sure I will one day. But if you're anything like me and a lot of other Aussies and global users, travelers are as well, you're super passionate about traveling. You want to be planning your next trip. That does not always align with my wallet, right? We are all under a bit of economic pressure. This would be very expensive for me to actually tick all of this off of my list. So that's what I'm excited to share with you today, is that I'm not alone in this. Consumers in Australia as well as globally are finding that challenging as well, right? How do you balance this interest for adventure, this interest for travel and exploration with the realities of the economic pressures that we're all feeling? So I'll take you through a bit of what we're seeing from a Google Insights perspective, as well as some recent survey data that we've been. And at the end, I'll leave you with a few tools that hopefully you and or your teams can tap into to really stay on the pulse of the consumer moving forward. So consumers are reevaluating what value means. And the term value might mean different things to every single one of us in this room, but ultimately we're seeing that 53% of Aussies are only buying the essentials. Again, essentials might mean different things to different people, but there's a tightening of the purse strings. I'm sure we're all super familiar with that from our own budgeting and prioritization as well. We also see that 45% of Aussies are feeling less confident about making large purchase decisions. They know that there are consequences if they get that wrong, so they're being a lot more thoughtful. They're spending a lot more time researching and really making sure that whatever value means to them is ultimately being achieved in that final purchase that they're making. Like I said, they do feel like there are consequences for getting that wrong. So we think about this as a confidence gap is existing, right? People are wanting to feel a lot more confident, a lot more sure that they're not missing a good deal or missing something else that might be meeting their needs and meeting whatever their definition of value is. So we're seeing that 3 in 5 Aussies feel as though they cannot afford to make that wrong decision. So as I mentioned, they're spending a lot more time researching, and the power is in their hands as the consumer to make that final decision. So we're seeing that a lot of them are reassessing their spending. We're seeing that 65% of Aussies are open to considering new brands as they are thinking about their purchase journey as well. And that, like I said, they're researching more. So 76% of Aussies are spending more time researching. And that really fuels itself, right? The more brands you consider, the more research you do, the more brands you consider that you're discovering, and it's sort of this cycle. So for anyone that was maybe here last year and heard my colleague Michelle speak, we talk about this as the messy middle. This consideration layer gets messier and is really complicated. Now, I promise there is good news at the end of this. Right, so people are spending a lot more time researching. So what can we learn about consumers based on this current climate, both across Australia and globally when it comes to what people are considering? So we have billions of searches happening every day in Google. This is one that is top of mind for me right now. One of my best friends is in Auckland. She just had a baby. Her middle name is Elizabeth, so I obviously can't keep her from her namesake, me, so I have to get to Auckland pretty soon. So there's a lot that goes into the background for us really understanding and being able to turn data into insights, right? So what's kind of going on in this search right now? We have the product, which is flights. We have the origin destination. We have the ultimate destination. I was just in the US, so maybe I searched for this while I was over in California. You have the IP user location. So we have all of this information, and AI helps us really refine and understand everything that's going on, like I said, so we can turn this massive amount of data into trends and insights. So let's stick with flights for this example. This is the search interest for flights in Australia since mid-2019 through to earlier this year. I'm sure everyone knows and understands why there are these dips here from the COVID waves, the various lockdowns, but really exciting to see that we are absolutely into recovery from a search interest standpoint anyway, and that the volumes, for searches are up beyond what we were seeing in 2019. So really positive that that momentum is coming back. Another way, this is all pulled from Google Trends, which is a free tool that all of you can use on your own as well. Another really cool way to think about this is looking at the trends across different markets to be able to compare recovery if you're thinking about domestic but also international interest, how that is being experienced by different people. So here we can see Australia versus the US and the UK. This is all indexed against the total population. So we can see it's actually a bit of a stronger recovery in Australia compared to the US and UK as we got into 2024. Another way that we can kind of look at this, when I showed the example before of your origin destination versus where you want to be going versus where you're actually located when you are searching, is thinking about looking at what Aussies are interested in versus globally and where they're all looking to go. So I've pulled this for June 2024. This is Aussies that are interested in accommodation and where they're looking to go domestically as well as outbound. There's probably not a huge ton of surprise in terms of just based on volume when it comes to Melbourne and Sydney, but I do think it gets really interesting and definitely has a lot of seasonality when it comes to some of the smaller cities and more regional areas. This is, I think, really interesting and important, and again, something that you and your teams can be keeping a pulse on when it comes to where is there demand that we can capture for our hotels, for our facilities, versus where do we need to drive demand? If we know that we have capacity in certain places and that interest just isn't there, where are we going to need to work a little bit harder versus what's already top of mind with consumers? When we look at inbound to Australia, this is really interesting as well. We can see that for June, the top markets were US, New Zealand, Singapore, UK, and India. When I looked at this most recently for April, UK was first and US was third. So this does change on an ongoing basis. Again, I think is really important as you think about what your strategy is. Money and investment is not endless, so how can we be smarter about where there are opportunities, which ones we want and need to lean into, versus where things might be kind of happening organically or we can tap into that demand separately. So as consumers are continuing to evolve how they search and what their expectations are, you may have noticed Google search evolving a little bit as well. It's definitely becoming a lot more visual. We still have at the heart of what we're trying to do is organize the world's information, make it really easily accessible, basically getting a consumer from their question as quickly as possible and as seamlessly as possible to the right information that's going to help them. From a hotel standpoint, this is continuing to evolve as well. I think this is just really important for everyone to think about you know your USP better than anyone else. So how can you really make sure that you're tapping into everything in your digital tool belt to make sure that your message, what makes your property special, is being highlighted and shared with consumers as they're looking for information and looking for confidence that your property, your hotel, your brand is ultimately going to meet their needs and meet their definition of value, right? Speaking about search becoming a lot more visual, video is an increasingly important medium. 80% of people said that they would watch a video to help them when it came to thinking about an activity, thinking about top attractions, tips and tricks for traveling. And I just think about it from my own experience, right? If I see a beautiful image of a hotel pool that I need to check out, that's going to be a lot more impactful to get me there than, plus great pool in text words, right? So again, think about what you're trying to showcase and what's really going to be the most impactful and meaningful way to get that across to consumers. So I mentioned before that momentum for travel in Australia is continuing to increase. From a search demand standpoint, we see that 2023 was 15% higher than 2022 and 30% higher if we go all the way back to 2019. So really positive momentum, but we are seeing that quality is trumping quantity. So the expectation is that Aussies are going to be traveling a bit less, but again, really wanting to be focused on what value means to them, and they are spending a lot more time trying to figure out what that's going to look like for them. Recent explorers are also nearly twice as likely to be making more trips. So I am not always this tan. I just landed back from an overseas trip on Saturday, and I already have a group chat going for my best friends trying to figure out where our next trip is going to be. So if you can find more people like me, that's definitely a good business decision, because I fall into that bucket of being constantly in market for travel. Motivations, though, for different people, it is expanding and changing on an ongoing basis. So when we did this survey late last year, we saw that adventure and discovery was the #1 reason for people wanting to take a trip and wanting to explore. Personal growth and meaning being second, and healing and stress relief being third. It's also interesting that there were some interesting demographic nuances to this as well. So it was especially important for the 55 to 75-year-old demographic, thinking about adventure and discovery versus younger travelers being interested in traveling for personal growth or healing and stress relief. I think this is really interesting as you think about your own current customer base and what you do know about them, and again, what messages you might be emphasizing to certain audiences versus others. When it comes to inspiration and getting excited about that next trip, Aussies on average use about 3 different resources. So this is very similar to my own experience with where I get inspiration for all those pins on my map. But word of mouth, online video, documentaries, and social media were the top ones. For those of you that might have properties in Australia versus other markets within APAC, it's interesting to see how this does differ. Again, important if you're thinking about a nuanced strategy for talking to Aussies versus talking to other markets as well. When we think about this same type of information for planning, it does increase across the board. So between 3 and 4 sources are used for Aussies. Google search being #1, nearly over 2 times more used than word of mouth for ultimately making that decision. Google Maps is on there too, a little bit lower, but that is definitely one that I fall in the bucket of. It does feel for a lot of Aussies, because of that financial pressure, that the stakes are higher. They're feeling like they have to be making the right decision and really wanting to have confidence in that. And that's where your digital storefront and being able to insert yourself into that journey is really helpful and really important. There are a lot of ways for you to help them make sure that they feel confident that the decision that they're making with you, with your property, is the right one, and again, meets whatever that definition of value is to them. The good news here is that as they are on that journey, they're very open to being influenced. So we see that 1 in 3 Aussies on that journey did change, whether it was their destination, whether it was their flight or their accommodation. So as they are considering more brands and continuing to do that research, they are open to being influenced. They're not set on whatever it was that they had in mind before. So again, if you can think about the best ways to connect that, there is that opportunity to influence them, which is really positive. So the researching journey is deeply embedded in digital, whether it is planning, inspiration, or all the way back around to ultimately sharing the excitement that you have when you did get to that hotel with the amazing pool and you want to share it to then influence someone else. So if I can just leave you with a few key takeaways for how to kind of action these insights for yourself and your team, I will leave you with 2.5 insights, key takeaways. The first is keeping a pulse on trends. So everything that I took you through today is available within Google Trends, Destination Insights, and Think with Google. All of these are free and accessible for you and your teams. This is obviously a big room of people, so it's really a great opportunity for you to get a bit more nuance for whatever your specific business challenge is, who your specific audience is. So I definitely recommend having a play around there. The second point is show up in those moments that travelers need inspiration and information. From a paid media standpoint, across Google, across YouTube, we have solutions across the board to help ensure that your message is getting to the right person at the right time so that you can help them close that confidence gap and ensure that what you have to offer meets their needs. The 2.5, the second part of this, is ensuring that your Google business profile is up to date for all of your locations and that you're continuing to really think about what are all of the assets in your tool belt to fuel that and ensure that you're making it as easy as possible for a user to get the right information. So with that, I'll wrap up and thank you all for your time today.